The boy was 12, an age when most children lived in the glow of discovery, when learning felt like adventure, when every new word or number added to the map of who they were becoming. But for him, learning had become something darker. His life was measured in red marks, the kind that bled across paper like wounds. Every test returned with the same merciless verdict: F. It wasn't just a grade. It was a scarlet reminder of inadequacy, something that branded itself deeper with each failure. For him, those Fs weren't just ink, they were proof that maybe he was defective, different, beyond fixing. The mansion around him did nothing to soften that pain. It was a place of grandeur, of towering ceilings and glittering chandeliers, where polished marble reflected endless wealth. To outsiders it looked like paradise. To him, it was a cage that echoed with his father's disappointment. His father was a man built of iron principles, polished shoes and relentless ambition. He had clawed his way from nothing to everything, constructing an empire of steel towers that reached into the skyline. In his world there was no room for weakness, no excuses, no second chances. Everything had to perform: employees, contracts, investments. And in his eyes, his son was underperforming too. That afternoon, the father's silhouette darkened the study door. He held a test paper as though it were a damning contract. His jaw tightened, his voice carried the weight of a verdict. Worthless. That's what this is. Worthless. And maybe that's what you are too. The boy didn't cry. He didn't argue. He simply sat there, blonde hair falling across his forehead, his fingers digging into the wooden arms of the chair. His silence wasn't strength, it was surrender. He had heard it too many times to fight anymore. Somewhere deep down he feared it was true. Whispers traveled fast through the mansion. Servants murmured in corridors, their voices hushed yet sharp. Another tutor gone. Another wasted fortune. Poor boy, maybe he's just not cut from his father's cloth. The staff pitied him, but their pity only added to his shame. By evening, the father had made his decision. As crystal glasses clinked on the long dining table, he turned to his assistant. We'll send him to boarding school. A strict one. Somewhere they don't tolerate failure. The words carried like thunder. The boy heard them though he wasn't meant to. To him, boarding school was not discipline, it was banishment. It was a silent confession that he wasn't worthy of home, of family, of belonging. That night, alone in his enormous room lined with trophies he had never earned, he stared at the latest failed test until his eyes blurred. His voice broke into the darkness. Maybe I really am broken. He whispered it not with defiance, but with the hollow tiredness of a child running out of hope. And yet, change often arrives like a whisper, not a storm. Hidden in the quietest corners, disguised as something ordinary. The next morning, the mansion woke the way it always did. The head butler issued orders. Maids polished silver until it gleamed. Cooks lit their stoves, preparing meals fit for royalty. Life in the house flowed like a machine of rituals. But through the service entrance came someone who didn't look like they belonged in such grandeur. She carried no polished suitcases, no air of wealth. Just a plain uniform, shoes worn at the edges, and a leather handbag faded from years of use. Her name was Marissa Johnson, 32. To the other staff, she looked like nothing more than a replacement maid, one of dozens who had come and gone. They barely gave her a glance. She won't last, one cook muttered, smirking. The boy drives people out faster than spoiled milk. They didn't know her. They didn't know that Marissa carried her own battles carved into memory. As a girl, she too had stared at letters that danced on the page, slipping out of order, mocking her. Teachers had called her lazy. Children had laughed. But her mother, her strong, patient mother, had sat beside her at a kitchen table lit by a dim bulb and whispered, "They don't hate you, baby. They just look different to you. We'll figure it out together." That mother was gone now. But the lesson remained, etched into Marissa's soul like scripture. No child was broken. Some just needed the world to slow down. As she unpacked her supplies that afternoon, she heard something, a furious scratching of pencil against paper, followed by a sharp groan. She paused, cloth in hand, and peeked through the half-open study door. There he was. The boy. Shoulders hunched, eyes wide with frustration, his pencil stabbing at the page as though he could force it into submission. Every attempt ended in eraser marks, holes in paper, another defeated slump of his shoulders. His small fists were clenched too tight for someone so young. Marissa froze. That look in his eyes, it wasn't just frustration. It was the same shame she had once felt. That quiet, suffocating belief that maybe the world was right about you, that maybe you just weren't enough. She stepped inside quietly. The boy glanced up, bracing himself for the scolding he expected. Instead, her voice was soft, tinged with humor. "You grip that pencil like it's a sword," she said. No wonder the paper's fighting back. For a moment he didn't understand. No adult had ever spoken to him like that, gentle, almost playful, without judgment. He blinked, confused. Marissa didn't push. She didn't correct him. She simply smoothed out one of his crumpled sheets, laid it carefully back on the desk, and went back to dusting. Her presence wasn't heavy. It was steady, like a calm note in the middle of chaos. The boy sat there, staring after her. Something in his chest shifted. That night, lying in his massive bed, he replayed her words like a secret treasure. For the first time in months he fell asleep without feeling crushed by failure. He didn't know it yet, but the first crack of light had slipped through the mansion's polished walls. And from that moment, nothing would ever be the same. The mansion was a world of rituals. Every morning began with the clatter of silver trays, the hum of vacuums, the aroma of freshly ground coffee drifting from the kitchen. Servants moved with practiced precision, each step rehearsed, each word measured. But that morning, as sunlight spilled across the marble floors and glinted off chandeliers, something different slipped quietly through the service entrance. Her name was Marissa Johnson. She was not glamorous, not polished like the world around her. 32 years of life had left their imprint in the curve of her shoulders and the determined set of her mouth. She wore a plain uniform, shoes worn at the soles, and carried a handbag that had clearly seen years of loyal service. It dangled from her shoulder like a companion, frayed at the edges but still dependable, much like Marissa herself. To the staff, she was invisible before she even began. A new maid, another face in a long line of replacements. They glanced at her, whispered behind her back, then went back to their tasks. "She won't last," muttered one cook to another, stacking pans. "The boy drives people out faster than spoiled milk." The other chuckled. "No one can deal with him. Too stubborn. Too broken. Mark my words, she'll be gone before the month ends." But Marissa didn't flinch at their words. She had long ago learned to let gossip wash over her. Those who spoke loudest were often those who had no idea what storms others carried inside. She unpacked her cleaning supplies with the care of someone who believed even small tasks deserved dignity. Every motion was deliberate, respectful, as though she honored even the simplest broom or cloth. Yet inside her, a memory stirred. A much younger Marissa, sitting at a rickety wooden table in a cramped kitchen. A little girl staring at letters that blurred and twisted on the page. Teachers had called her lazy. Classmates had whispered cruel names. The shame had been unbearable. But across from her sat her mother, a woman with patient eyes and a voice like a bomb. "They don't hate you, baby," her mother had whispered, tracing letters in the air with her finger. "They just look different to you. But we'll figure them out together." Her mother was gone now, but that memory lived like a lantern inside her. And though Marissa had taken jobs that most overlooked, scrubbing floors, polishing silver, folding linens, she carried her mother's lesson with her everywhere. No child is broken. They only need someone who sees differently. That afternoon, as Marissa dusted near the grand study, she heard it, the furious scratching of a pencil. The sound was followed by a groan, low and heavy, the kind of sound that only comes when defeat has settled deep in a soul. She paused. Her hand tightened around the feather duster. Slowly she pushed the half-open door and peered inside. There he was. The boy. His small frame hunched over the desk, shoulders tense, blonde hair falling into his eyes. His fist gripped the pencil so tightly his knuckles whitened. On the desk lay a battlefield of crumpled pages, each scarred with angry eraser marks, torn edges, and red ink. The words in front of him seemed to mock him, slipping from his grasp no matter how fiercely he tried to hold them. Marissa's breath caught in her chest. She knew that look, the desperation, the quiet shame, the way failure seemed to whisper that it was permanent. She had worn that same expression once. She had sat at her own desk, fighting letters that wouldn't stay still, feeling stupid, broken, hopeless. The boy looked up suddenly, his face hardening like a shield. He expected anger. He expected to be told he was lazy, careless, hopeless. It was the same response he always received. But Marissa only smiled softly. "You grip that pencil like it's a sword," she said lightly. "No wonder the paper's fighting back." For a moment, silence filled the room. The boy blinked. He didn't understand. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No adult had ever used humor, kindness, or understanding. He didn't know how to respond. Marissa didn't press him. She didn't lecture or scold. She simply picked up one of the torn pages from the floor, smoothed it out carefully, and set it back on the desk. Then she turned and went back to dusting, humming softly under her breath as though nothing unusual had occurred. But to the boy it was not nothing. It was everything. That night, as he lay in his enormous bed beneath sheets finer than most would ever touch, he turned her words over and over in his mind. No wonder the papers fighting back. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that someone hadn't blamed him. For the first time in so long he felt a flicker of hope. A question whispered at the edge of his thoughts. What if I'm not broken after all? For the first time in months, he drifted into sleep without tears stinging his eyes. In the days that followed, Marissa kept her distance, but not too much. She didn't announce herself as a tutor. She didn't presume authority. She was simply present. When she dusted near the study, her eyes would wander to his pages. When she passed him in the hall, she offered a nod and a smile. Her presence wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was quiet, steady, patient. The staff began to whisper again. "Did you see her? In the study with him?" one maid muttered. "She acts like she knows better than the tutors." "Won't matter," another replied with a smirk. "She'll end up like the rest. The boy chews people up and spits them out." But Marissa heard their words and let them fall away. She wasn't there for their approval. She wasn't even there for the billionaire who signed her paychecks. She was there because she had recognized the same silent struggle in that boy's eyes that had once lived in hers. And what she didn't realize was that the boy had already carried her words upstairs like a secret treasure. For him, it was the first time someone had spoken to him without condemnation. The first time someone had treated his failure not as proof of weakness, but as something that could change. The mansion carried on with its routines, its wealth, its whispers. But in the quiet spaces, in the overlooked corners of that sprawling house, something had shifted. The boy didn't know it yet, and neither did Marissa, but the first steps of transformation had already begun. Sometimes change doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it enters as quietly as a maid with a worn handbag, humming softly while she dusts. And sometimes that's all it takes to begin rewriting a life. The days turned into weeks, and the boy's world began to tilt in ways so subtle that at first no one noticed. Every afternoon, when the mansion quieted and the father was locked away in meetings or phone calls, Marissa found herself drifting toward the study. She always entered with humility, carrying her dust cloth or polish, but the truth was that her purpose was more than chores. She was watching him, listening, waiting for the right moment. One evening, she found him slumped over the desk, his face buried in his arms, the lamplight casting tired shadows across his young features. A pencil rolled from his fingers and clattered to the floor. She bent down, picked it up, and set it gently before him. "You ever try listening to the words instead of fighting them?" she asked. The boy lifted his head, eyes clouded with frustration. He didn't answer. So Marissa pulled up a chair beside him, uninvited but not unwelcome. She opened the book on the desk, ran her finger beneath a line, and read it aloud, slowly, carefully, letting each syllable fall into the air as though it mattered. Then she nudged the book toward him. "Your turn," she said softly. He tried. The letters jumbled on his tongue, the words slipped away, and shame flooded his face. He shoved the book aside, voice trembling. "See? I can't. I'm broken." Marissa leaned back, her gaze steady. "You're not broken. You just see the world in a different rhythm. My mama told me the same thing. Took me years to believe her. But she was right." The boy blinked. No one had ever said such words to him. No one had ever admitted to knowing what it felt like. He stared at her, unsure if she was serious. Marissa smiled faintly. She picked up the pencil and began tracing letters in the air. She let him draw them with his finger on the desk, whispering their sounds like secrets instead of commands. She slowed the pace until it matched the rhythm of his understanding. For the first time, the boy wasn't being hurried. He wasn't being scolded. He was being taught in a way that made sense to him. And then it happened. He managed to read one full sentence, halting but complete. His eyes widened. His mouth hung open in disbelief. I did it." Marissa clapped softly, pride lighting her face. "See? They don't hate you. They just needed you to meet them in your own way." That night, the boy carried the book upstairs like it was treasure. Beneath the covers, he whispered the same sentence to himself again and again until sleep claimed him. Whispers in the halls. But the mansion had ears everywhere. In the pantry, in the kitchen, in the laundry rooms, staff whispered. "You hear? The new maid's teaching him now." A maid teaching a billionaire's son? Bold move. She'll be fired soon enough. Some shook their heads with pity, others smirked with certainty. None believed Marissa could succeed where the finest tutors had failed. But the boy didn't care what they thought. Each afternoon he sat at his desk with pencil sharpened, waiting. His eyes brightened at the sound of her footsteps in the hall. For the first time in his life he wanted to learn. Together they carved out a rhythm. Chalk letters on the blackboard. Words whispered slowly, like secrets shared between friends. Some days were triumphant, others filled with tears and frustration. Papers were still crumpled. Pencils still snapped in anger. But Marissa never raised her voice. Never gave up. She was patient, steady, unwavering. The boy began to change. His handwriting steadied. His eyes carried more light. Even his posture shifted, no longer the slouch of defeat, but the tentative straightness of someone beginning to believe he might not be worthless after all. A father's suspicion. One morning, the father stormed into the study with another stack of test results in hand. His footsteps echoed like thunder across the marble floors. He pushed the door open, prepared to deliver another sharp lecture, another reminder of failure. But what he found stopped him cold. His son wasn't slumped in despair. He wasn't hiding crumpled tests under the desk. He was sitting upright, carefully sounding out each line of a workbook. Beside him sat Marissa, not correcting, not scolding, but quietly guiding with patience. The father froze. His eyes narrowed. For a moment, the empire builder, the titan of steel and glass, didn't know what to say. He simply placed the new tests on the desk, his jaw clenched, and turned on his heel without a word. The boy didn't flinch. For the first time in his life, his father's presence didn't shatter him. He felt something else stirring inside: courage. A different kind of teaching. As the weeks passed, Marissa's lessons deepened. She didn't just teach him to read words, she taught him to trust himself. On the hardest days, when letters twisted and refused to cooperate, she reminded him gently, "It's not about being perfect. It's about progress." When his frustration boiled over into fists slamming against the table, she calmly placed her hand on the desk and whispered, "Patience, not punishment. That's how we win." And slowly something bloomed in him. It wasn't just knowledge, it was dignity. He began sharing small victories with her. "I read a paragraph before bed. I spelled a word without getting stuck." Each success was a step away from the boy who once whispered, "Maybe I'm broken." Word of his progress spread quietly at first. A teacher at his private school remarked, "Is this the same boy? He's trying. Really trying." Staff in the mansion noticed too. The boy who once avoided eye contact now walked with his chin a little higher. The boy who once tore up papers now placed them proudly on the fridge, even when they weren't perfect. And though the whispers of doubt still circled, something undeniable was happening. The boy was changing, not because of wealth, not because of specialists, but because one woman refused to let him drown in failure. But transformation never comes without resistance. One evening, after hours of work, the boy slammed his book shut, tears brimming. "It's useless. I'll never get it right. I'm still a failure." Marissa leaned in, her voice calm but firm. "You are not a failure. Do you hear me? You are not. Failure is a moment, not a person." He shook his head, fists trembling. "But Dad says, your father built buildings. I'm helping you build belief. And belief will outlast steel any day." Her words sank deeper than any lecture ever had. The boy wiped his face with his sleeve, opened the book again and tried one more time. His voice was shaky, halting, but he finished the paragraph. And when he looked up, Marissa smiled with pride. "You see? You're learning to fight back. Not with anger, not with fists, but with patience." For the first time, the boy realized he wasn't alone in the battle. And that realization changed everything. Marissa had broken through where everyone else had failed. She hadn't done it with money or authority or credentials. She had done it with something the mansion had never known: patience. And patience was about to turn a boy the world had labeled worthless into something his father never imagined possible. The test day came quietly, without fanfare. No expensive tutors hovered with clipboards. No specialists circled the room with stern expressions. It was just a boy, a sharpened pencil, and the lessons whispered into him by a woman the world had overlooked. He sat at his desk in the study, shoulders steady for once. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. Marissa lingered in the doorway, not too close, not too far, just present, the way her mother had once been for her. She didn't whisper answers. She didn't correct his grip. She only gave him the smallest nod, the kind that meant, "You can do this." The boy bent over his paper, lips moving quietly as he sounded out the words. His hand trembled, but he pressed on. For the first time, the letters didn't twist. The sentences didn't slip away. They stayed. When it was done, he carried the paper to his father's office himself. No tutor, no assistant, just him. His fingers shook as he handed it over. The billionaire barely looked up from his mountain of contracts. Irritated, he took the paper without interest. But when his eyes reached the top corner, they froze. His brow furrowed. He flipped the sheet, scanning every line as though searching for a trick. An A. Not a curve. Not a pity grade. A clean, undeniable A. For a long moment, silence filled the room. The man who had conquered skylines, who had crushed competitors with iron will, stared at a single letter that he never thought he would see beside his son's name. The boy stood silently, waiting for the familiar sigh of disappointment. But it never came. Instead, his father looked up sharply. How? The boy didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes shifted toward the doorway. There stood Marissa, still holding the rag she had carried in with her, as if she had only come to clean. But in that moment, the billionaire finally saw her, not as staff, not as a name on payroll, but as the person who had done what money and power never could. The paper trembled in his hands. His jaw tightened. For the first time in his life, words failed him. That evening, he called Marissa into the study. She braced herself, expecting anger for daring to step out of her role. Instead, he placed the test paper on the desk between them. His voice was low, reluctant but real. You saved him, he said. Name your raise. From now on you don't scrub floors. You will be his tutor. Marissa's throat tightened. She nodded once, steady. But when she left the room, her eyes burned with tears she hadn't allowed herself in years. Weeks turned into months. The boy's grades continued to climb. Teachers whispered in astonishment. Is this the same child? He used to fail everything. Now he's brilliant. At home, the mansion transformed. Where silence once ruled, laughter now drifted through the halls. Where test papers were once hidden under beds, they were proudly displayed on the fridge, even the ones that weren't perfect. Progress mattered now more than perfection. And the billionaire, a man who had believed money could buy everything, learned something wealth had never taught him. Brilliance doesn't grow under pressure. It blooms under patience. Marissa remained by the boy's side, no longer a maid but a guide, a mentor, a living reminder that sometimes the world's miracles come from the most overlooked places. To the boy, she wasn't just the woman who taught him to read. She was proof. Proof that he had never been broken. Proof that one person's patience could change everything. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice refusing to give up to remind you that you were never worthless. You were simply waiting for the right person to believe in you. And in that mansion, where wealth had once been the only language spoken, a new truth echoed in every corner. The greatest power isn't money or status or brilliance. It's compassion.